Welcome. Today's conversation is going to be very, very engaging. It's going to be informative. This is Warren Fogelman with Business Success Solution, and we are talking about fraud prevention, how to strategically safeguard your clients' financials. And the conversation today is with Greg Height. A little bit about what to expect is we're going to uncover the overlooked weaknesses that put your clients at risk. We're going to also go into advanced strategies to protect your clients' financials against fraud and looking at true crimes, intriguing case studies, and some real world examples. So Greg is very, very generous. He is going to share a lot of information for you, and also we'll let you know how to connect with him as we wrap up today. So a little bit about Greg Height. He's a licensed CPA and a veteran stand-up comedian. He and his partner, Caleb Newquist, launched their podcast, Oh My Fraud, at the beginning of 2022, and it's quickly become one of the most popular white-collar true crime podcasts. So he has been doing that. He entertains, he does stand-up comedy, and it's been going on for over 20 years. So I just want to say he's even had the privilege of opening for Weird Al Yankovic. And you can learn more about Greg Height and Oh My Fraud at ohmyfraud.com, which is ohmyfraud.com. So, Greg, I am looking forward to this conversation about fraud, about how you approach things, and giving everybody some information. So, thanks so much for joining me today.
Of course, super excited to be here. And not only that, I'm excited to meet you in person in just a couple of weeks. We're going to be out in Hilton Head, South Carolina at the Accounting and Financial Women's Alliance Women Who Count conference. So so many things to look forward to.
Yep, absolutely. One of my favorite things is getting to meet my virtual connections in person. It's like a bonus.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Me too.
And before we go into the whole topic, I just want to find out, how did you become an expert on fraud?
Oh, yeah. So that is an interesting story. In a previous life, I was actually a middle school math teacher. So I taught math for about 10 years. Didn't really enjoy that profession so much. You know, you can imagine teaching middle schoolers, not the thing that gets you psyched to get out of bed in the morning. I went back to school. I became a CPA. I started working at a firm. I started realizing that we had to take continuing education. I had an education background. I had an entertainment background. I realized quickly that I could present continuing education to our profession, but I was still brand new in the profession, and fraud was something that intrigued me, and it was pretty easy to crack into because fraud, I've never gotten my like CFE license or anything like that. I have been a member of the ACFE for a couple of years, but what I found is teaching about fraud, the principles are very simple in terms of what to look for fraud, the red flags for fraud. And also it was an easy entrance into starting to teach in the accounting profession. So it kind of a low bar to get into it. But yeah, I've been presenting on fraud for over a decade, and we've been doing this fraud podcast for the last couple of years.
And because of the fact that you've really put yourself into the whole fraud world, I'm sure you've seen so many different cases,
Yeah.
and that some of them are pretty mundane and others are like, you can't make this stuff up. So
Right.
I would love to hear what you've seen as maybe one that stands out and some of the details that just fascinated you.
Yeah. So and it's hard to pick a favorite because we have covered so many fraud stories, and it seems like the longer we do the podcast, we end up finding another one that's like, that's my new favorite one. But I think the current standout, mostly for best story, has to do with a company called Brex, which was a Canadian company. It was a public company, and it's called a junior mining company, which basically means that it's a mining exploration company. So this is the company that goes and finds where minerals are, and then they sell the rights to those minerals to an actual mining company that's going to come and excavate get the goods out of the ground. So they were started, if I'm remembering the timeline right, Brex began in the 80s, and they were not good at what they did. Their stock tanked. They were officially a penny stock on the Canadian stock exchanges. And they were getting ready to declare bankruptcy and just wrap stuff up. But as kind of a Hail Mary, the person who started the company hired this new geologist. The geologist and the owner went to, or the founder went to Borneo, which is this huge island in the South Pacific. It's actually what, if I'm remembering right, it's not just in one, it's a huge island, but like Malaysia claims part of the island, Indonesia claims part of the island, and there's a couple of other countries that claim parts of this island. Um, and they went there, and the geologist is like, he's like going, we have found gold in Borneo. And they go back, they make a press release, we have found gold in Borneo. And their stock price obviously starts to increase because all of a sudden this company that hadn't done anything before had it just all of a sudden struck gold. They hired a team to go out there. Now the other thing you need to remember about, or you have to realize about Borneo, incredibly dense rainforest for the entire island. So the place where they found gold was this very remote location in the mountains, obviously, of this mountainous area of this island. The only way to get to the area where they found gold is you'd fly into Borneo, and then you had to basically you had to rent a helicopter to get you up to the area where they started just kind of a very primitive camp when looking for these gold. But they found these samples, they sent these samples back. The samples had such traces of, and they kept finding better and better samples. But the original samples, they would like analyze them for the particles that were in them, and it's like, we found gold. And then they'd find other samples, like it's getting better. Like they take samples from different places. Every time they sent back a new sample from a different place, not only would their stock price increase, but their stock price would obviously increase, but every sample seemed to be every new sample increased their value because they're like going, gold is all over the place. But then on top of that, every sample came back showing even more gold in the area that they had found. So there's a lot of intrigue at this point because it's a Canadian company. They start partnering with the actual mining company that's going to get the gold out of the earth. But then the local governments are like going, "Oh my gosh, we sold these guys this land for nothing because we had no idea there was gold on it." So the government shoehorns its way back in as like, "Hey, we're not going to let you excavate this stuff unless we get a bigger chunk of what you're gonna pull out of the ground." It's a big kerfuffle. Finally, they get to an agreement with all these parties, and mind you, stock prices at this point went from less than 10 cents a share up to $250 a share. So a boon for anyone
Mhm.
who had shares in this company. And then there's the actual, so you have the geologist who found the stuff, but then there was another geologist who works for the company. He was the guy he was a man from the Philippines. He was boots on the ground. He was the guy finding the samples and sending these samples back. He would fly back and forth from Borneo to Canada because that was his job. And so as the story goes, the founder and both geologists are at this big extravagant party they're throwing because these guys are just rolling in it now and everything's looking up for them. And while they're at this party, the mining company that's going to get the gold out of the earth in Borneo, they send a message to the company going, "Hey, where's all the gold?" And because they're going, "We're starting to do our excavation and we are not finding gold here in Borneo." And they're like going, "Come on," not, the company's like going, "We have all these samples. We know there's gold there." So the boots on the ground guy, they send him back to Borneo to just to solve the problem. They're like, "You're the guy who found the gold. You're the guy who's going to fix the problem." So he flies to Borneo. He gets on his helicopter to fly to the actual camp, to the mining facility. And on his helicopter flight to the mining location, the dude jumps out of the helicopter to his death over the Borneo jungle because he had been lying this entire time about finding gold. What he had been doing is he'd been finding like junk jewelry, like not junk jewelry, but it was gold jewelry,
Mhm.
and he would take shavings of this jewelry, and he would basically contaminate his sample with gold jewelry shavings to prove to commit his fraud that there's all this gold. that's in Borneo. So right there, I go, this is one of my favorite frauds because
Mhm.
this guy gets caught, and instead of actually owning up to it, the dude jumps out of a helicopter into a jungle. But it gets even better than that because the dense jungle takes him like 2 weeks to find the body. It's a tropical jungle. His body after 2 weeks is not only eaten by like insects and animals, but it's also decomposing because it's hot and it's humid, and meat doesn't last very long in those circumstances. They find the body, they take it to someone to examine the body, and they're like going, we don't think this is the dude that it's supposed to be. Like they're like, this is, I mean, they can't conclusively say it's not his body, but there's so many things that are like, this doesn't, there's things that just don't match between the corpse that they found and the guy that actually was supposed to have jumped to his death to avoid consequences from his fraud. So this dude had again, according to our research, had $4 million that he had earned from his stock options with the company as the stock exploded. So he's sitting on $4 million. He dies. They start trying to find his family. Well, he dies, but maybe doesn't die. But they're trying to
Mhm.
find his family. Turns out the guy has not one family, he has four families. He's got four women that he's married in different parts of the world that are all like, oh no, my husband died. And they're like, wait, your husband? My husband. And then another was like, wait a second, he's my husband. And so they got four families that are a grieving, but also kind of pissed off because what the hell is happening with this guy? Right. So this is crazy. And then on top of that, at least I think it was one of the widows. I think it wasn't all three of the widows, but one of the widows was like, she received a weird phone call, and then shortly after that, there was $150,000 that was just deposited into her bank account. This is after the guy dies. And she's like going, that's him. He's alive. So to this day, there's a theory, and I think it's a reasonable theory, that this dude, that he got a corpse from some morgue in Borneo, that he put it in his clothes, and as they're flying over the jungle, he pushes it out, but he paid off the helicopter pilots to drop him off somewhere else. He flees, I think, back to Canada, where he's got his $4 million and somehow worked it out to where he could access his money still, and he's got a little bit, maybe a tiny bit of a conscience, or maybe he really loved these women and he's kind of trying to take care of them from beyond the grave, but he hasn't shown up yet. So yeah, epilogue for Briex. Obviously, when everybody finds out there's no gold, their stock collapses, they go out of business. But also, interestingly enough, about I think there was multiple criminal investigations and multiple civil investigations of the founder and of the other geologist who kind of says, hey, there's gold here, but that was about it. None of them have faced any kind of like, none of the cases went through. It's presumed that if the guy who is missing was ever found, or if he did pass away and he was alive, that he would have gone to jail for the fraud. But the other parties were absolved from the crime, but also lost all their money because of the because of what happened.
Okay, Greg, you can't make this stuff up.
No, you absolutely can't. No, it's the most wild story around. And
Mhm.
right, it's so fun because so often our fraud cases are like, oh, this person was a trusted person within the company and they stole money over all these times and you wouldn't have expected it. But this one, it has a guy jumping out of an airplane, but maybe not, faking your own death. And it has this whole problem of this guy with all these different, second, third, fourth families. And I do think it's very interesting, as we see in so many fraud cases, there ends up being little to no consequences for a lot of the people who clearly were involved. But again, like I said, the founder and the founder claims that he was just as duped as everybody else. I think that might be the case. The other geologist, to this day, he still says, no, I believe that there's a massive amount of gold in Borneo. And so he's like, he has tenaciously stuck to that story, that he's like, nope, I know that there's gold in them dar hills, we just need to find it. And that's it. So yeah, crazy
Uh-huh.
story. It's episode 38 of our podcast if you want to listen.
Absolutely worth listening to. I've listened to your podcast, and Oh My Fraud is very, very entertaining. So the stories are great, but get back to, most of us that are not living such an extreme lifestyle, doing things to that complexity. I know that almost any type of business, especially if they're taking cash, is open to fraud, from solo to the top 100. So what are some of the things that actually leaves a business open to fraud? And are there anything that we can do to be preventative about that?
So the research. So one of the things that I rely heavily on for the podcast for the continuing education that I teach on fraud is the ACFE. Every 2 years, that's the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Every 2 years, they release a report that's called the Report to the Nations on Occupational Fraud. And according to that report, every time they report it, we always see that governmental entities and small businesses are disproportionately affected by fraud, because they don't have the resources that big companies have to try to prevent fraud. So when you're looking at small companies and the frauds that are committed there, I mean, we even joke about it on the podcast that we're a little bit bored every time we see a fraud that happens because there's a lack of separation of duties, which is just the basic thing where you can't have a one person accounting department. So if the same person is collecting the cash, they're reporting the cash, they're reconciling the bank statements, they've got control of the cash, all that sort of stuff, and not even necessarily cash, but even we're talking checks, we're talking access to online things of that nature. That's when the lack of separation of duties is it's not that is pervasive. We see that continually throughout the cases that we look at. But again, that's for smaller businesses. For the bigger companies with the bigger frauds, and even looking at this BRIEX thing, there's a few things that we can learn from those. First off, management override of controls. That's a big problem, and that's a problem that's difficult to root out, because if somebody is at the top,
Second, I have multiple speakers going at one time.
oh, you're good.
Okay. Okay, let's try it again. I have my gardeners outside, so life is happening as we speak.
Right, I get that. That's happened to me too, where I have a lawnmower that's like, I mean, sure, it's on the other side of the window, but it's only 10 feet away while I'm trying to hear or to speak. So I get that. Are we good?
Yeah, you know what? We're going to make it work. This is real life,
Cool.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. So management override is a big problem. It's hard to root out though, because the people at the top of the company, they're always going to have the ability to go in and to not, they can, depending on the company, more or less at will do things without having to abide by the controls that are in place. So that's a very difficult thing to root out. But and then even with the BRIEX case, one of the things we see there, it's similar to management override, but you had one person who was in charge, and that was sort of the thing, is that he was giving back these samples. But again, we're at this place where it's incredibly difficult and incredibly costly to get people out there. But in my mind, the mining company that was teaming with them, they shouldn't have gone and built this camp to get the gold out. They needed to send their own people to verify this stuff before they actually teamed up, because everybody was just excited about the hype of all these samples that they were seeing, and it hadn't been independently verified. And so, I mean, again, that's technically what our audits are supposed to be, is supposed to be an independent verification of your financial statements. In this case, they needed independent verification that the samples of the earth were actually did contain gold. So but in those big companies, again, they've got the budget to have an internal audit department. And we do find that the internal audit department is one of the most effective internal controls to have at your business, where you've got a team of people working independently to try to make sure everything's happening as it should.
Okay, and I understand that. I hear about the management override, but I want to get back to that one person accounting department, because even if it sounds like a great idea, it's pie in the sky for these smaller business owners, where all they really need is one person to be taking the collections and then doing the bookkeeping and then making the deposits. So is there something even on a smaller scale that these business owners can put in place in order to reduce the possibility of fraud.
Yeah.
Because even I'm going to say, real life, even my physician ended up having fraud happen.
Yeah.
And her office, she was this one person with a book, a front office person, and it put her out of practice. It changed
Yeah.
her whole outlook on everything.
Uh, which and that kills me because so my day job, I'm a controller for a group of medical office buildings. So it's kind of the medical real estate side, but all of the owners in these buildings it's all independently owned by physicians. And it's shocking how many
Mhm.
physicians, especially independent physicians, how often they have been embezzled from by their trusted employees. So you bring up a very interesting point because we all know that, I mean, if you just get back to the philosophy of business in general, profits come from risk. You take a risk to open a business, that's how you get your profits.
Mhm.
And so when you look at that, one of the risks that is just inherent in business is you could get stolen from. Now you can do one of two things. You can spend all the money to make sure that you never just have one person who's in charge of your finances, to make sure that there is a separation, at least some basic separation of duties kind of things. Um, but at some point there's the cost benefit analysis that you have to do as well. We've done at least, I think it's at least three now of our episodes are about the defrauded famous, where we've looked at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Billy Joel, Kevin Hart, just some
Mhm.
celebrities out there who have had frauds happen to them. Dane Cook was another one that we looked at. And those guys, the problem with them is that they are the business, just like physicians. Because one of the things I didn't know about a physician before I started, or I didn't realize, I didn't put the pieces together, is the physician isn't just the business owner, he's also the technician. He's the person who's in there sawing, the orthopedic surgeon, he's the guy sawing the
Mhm.
bones up, but he also runs the business. So he a lot of times doesn't have the knowledge, and more importantly doesn't have the time to really micromanage those finances. So that's why they hire someone to do that for them.
Mhm.
But what if you're so even like when we look at these people who are incredibly successful, whether it's as an athlete or as an entertainer, they do have, and I feel horrible for your physician friend who went out of business for it. But a lot of times when we look at these celebrities, they have a massive fraud. It's millions of dollars that's taken from them. But then it's like, okay, you got to go on tour for another. You got to add another stop to your tour, and you made the money back. And it's like it's again, it's one of the risks. And again, some people won't be able to recover from it, but that's how risk works. So business, there's always a risk reward kind of thing. Matter of fact, I think it's funny because I was thinking about this just today, because one of the things we were going to talk about is, can people protect themselves from fraud? And what's weird, I love reading like Oprah, like quasi spiritual
Right.
books all the time. And literally right before coming on, from the reading I did today from this great book called The Book of Awakening, it says this. It says, is it possible to live so defensively that you never get to live at all? And I think that's the same thing that you can apply to fraud, where it's like, I mean, even think about like with personal safety. Let's put fraud aside. If you just wanted to make sure that you weren't ever going to get physically hurt, I was thinking about this just the other day. Why aren't we required to wear seatbelts in our cars? Why aren't we required to wear helmets in our cars? And you start looking at like what NASCAR drivers wear when they drive around. Why aren't we all required to do that every time we get in the car? Well, it's because of the cost benefit analysis. And it's because you start going, eventually, I could spend all my time trying to protect myself from physical harm, where I don't have any time left in the day to do anything else. It's a similar thing with prevention from fraud. Are there things you can do? Absolutely. Tons of things that you can do. But you also could do, if you're trying to make sure that you will never ever be defrauded, you might be spending all your time doing that and spend no time actually making money.
But I would think that a business that accepts cash is at higher risk for the one that doesn't.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. Although what we're also finding is that when the less you take cash and the more we have like online access to bank accounts and things like that. So
Mhm.
as cash is going away, because cash is very easy to steal.
Yes.
But then you're starting to see where people there's a whole lot more of these online shenanigans. You get, if you've got a routing number and a bank account number, you can steal money from your company. That used to not to be the case, but now it absolutely is. So yes, it's, well, there's gosh, what's his name? He's the former CEO of the Maryland Association of CPAs. Tom Hood is his name.
Mhm.
And his thing for accountants, it was his thing was always uh your learning has to be greater than your rate of learning has to be greater than the rate of change. That's what he would always tell people in the accounting profession. You gotta he was like, you've got to be so much smarter. You got to be an early adopter. Whatever's happening in our profession, you need to jump on it immediately and get there. I think the same thing is true with fraud. There's always new ways, there's new technologies, there's new ways that people are going to try to take your money. You need to be you need to be aware of what's happening, and you need to be aware of the basic easy things that you can do to protect your assets and to protect your money. And so your rate of learning needs to be greater than the rate of change within the fraudsters community right there. That's how you protect yourself, because there's always, I mean, shoot, I just got I mean, again, it's weird the timing of these things. I just got a text message just yesterday, and the text message was from an unknown number, and it said, hey, what time are you off work again today? And that was the whole text message. And I go, I know enough about this stuff to know that that's somebody who I'm if I respond to them, they're gonna be like, sorry, wrong number. They're gonna be, oh shoot, so sorry about that, who is this? And then they'll try to and I did, I responded to him, and I started having this interaction. And sure enough, it was this whole thing where it's like, hey, it's weird that a wrong number ended up making me a new friend. And the person sends me a picture of themselves and is starting to ask me a bunch of questions about myself. And I'm gonna keep interacting with them because I just want to see what
You were just curious.
I was just curious. Oh, and everything I told this person was 100% a lie.
Yeah.
So
But you were doing research.
yeah, I'm doing research. Well, I mean, and again, it's me. So this person sends me a picture, and again, I don't know if the person behind it is actually a man or woman, but they send me this a picture of a very attractive woman going, "This is me," and I googled ugly man, and I went to images, and I just took an image off of that, and I sent it back to her, and I go, "This is me." And the man clearly was like in his 30s, and I go, I'm 55 years old, but most people say I look older. So I'm like totally giving. I tell her, she says, where are you from? And I tell her I'm from I'm from the town of, what did I say, West New Bergtonville, East Carolina. So again, I'm basically saying I'm just messing with you through this whole thing. Through this whole thing. But again, I just want to, I'm trying to play around with them because
Mhm.
I would like to have a firsthand look at when they're like going, hey, I had a hard time. Any chance you could Venmo me some
Yeah.
money or something like that? And again, we did a whole episode on this thing called pig butchering, which is where people set up relationships like that. And then instead of, they never ask you to send them money, but they start talking about investments that they have. And they go, I have this really successful investment. It's making me tons of money. If you're interested, I can send you the link. They send you the link. It's a incredibly professional page where you can research on the page what this investment is, and there's a way to set up an account and to do, but it's all BS. And as soon as you transfer money, boof, it's gone, and you're never going to get that back. And
Mhm.
incredibly, and this goes back to the thing of how can people protect themselves is there are stories of incredibly sophisticated people. There was a man well, our episode was about a guy who he was the CEO of a bank in Kansas, and he was in so deep. I mean, again, somebody who should know better. He was in so deep, he started stealing money from the bank to continue to pay off his problems with this pig butchering
Mhm.
situation that he was in. So a diversification, that's another great way great way to protect yourself when you're looking at investments and Ponzi schemes and stuff like that. Make sure you're never putting everything into one investment, because you never know how that's going to go. So some simple things like that.
Mhm. So that's something where you were doing research because you know better. But were
Right.
you ever in a situation where you didn't know better and actually somebody took advantage of you and you ended up having your own fraud experience?
Right. Has that happened?
Yeah.
Fortunately, no. I got super close. There was one day I got super close again. It was with a text message. I got a text where it says, "Hey, this is the USPS. We have a parcel that we can't deliver because it's got a partial address."
Oh, I just had that this week.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And I was so close because you go, I don't
Uh-huh.
remember ordering anything, but hey, if
Yeah.
there's a parcel for me, I sure as heck want it. And this was the thing, well, maybe not, I guess you don't know how things would
Yeah.
have unfolded differently. The link that they had wasn't a live link. You had to copy
Mhm.
and paste it to be able to go to that link. Um, if it hadn't been, if it had been a live link, I think there was a much better chance that I would have clicked on that to figure that out. You know, as I, so like I saw it in my car when I parked at my job, and then between then and when I got into my office, I was like, this doesn't make any sense at all. There's no way they would send me a text message about that. They would, you
Mhm.
know, how would they have known that this was me to begin with? How would they have a phone number, a correct and accurate phone number without having a complete address for a parcel? So there's all this stuff that became clear,
Yep.
but I got super close. Also, in terms of personal experiences with fraud, this, and I have to say, just because I'm scared and I don't want to be sued for slander, this was not fraud. But at my work, the person who was the manager of the buildings before me, he took out he took $605,000 from the company as a loan from the company. It was taken out over the course of about 12 years. He was contracted for a certain amount of pay every year, but he would receive checks in excess of his pay. And when the
Mhm.
outside accounting firm, which, and that's actually how I started working for this company, as I was working for the accounting
Mhm.
firm first, what, but they had been dealing with this for many years before I came around. And every year they'd be like, "Hey, you're supposed to get paid this much, but we're seeing checks of this much. What's going on?" He's like, "Oh, it's a loan," and they would book it as a loan, and they'd start accruing interest on it. But
So, yeah, go ahead.
well, but there, and it's always like, and that was this person's story, was he was like, it's a
Mhm.
loan, and
Right.
I have a cabin up there, which he did. I'd been to his cabin. He says the cabin's the collateral. So if I ever don't pay on this loan, then the building can take the collateral. The problem was there was zero legal documents around this
Mhm.
loan. And one thing that you know about loans, there needs to be legal documents. That cabin, it's not collateral until you pledge it as collateral to your loan. The other thing about loans is that when you take a loan, you not only have to have it supported by legal documents, but you need to pay back. Usually there's a repayment plan that starts pretty much immediately, even when you're talking about a mortgage or a credit card or anything. There's a minimum payment that you have to start paying immediately. There were zero payments ever towards principal or interest for the, like I said, decades plus
Mhm.
that this money had been being taken out of the company. And what made it even weirder is that so I started just on the engagement, but it was my first year's accounting. I was just showing up because I needed some billable hours and I was good at QuickBooks. So that was the extent of my involvement. Then I got hired by the company. I'm like going, "Hey, so what about this loan now?" Because I was there basically, I was their accounting department. And so I have to
Mhm.
go to the board of directors and be like, "Hey, so he's got this loan with interest. It's now over $700,000. There hasn't been any repayment. Are you aware of this?" And they would be like, "Not really." And even though the person who was above me at the accounting firm assured me that everyone was, and then be like, "What do we do about it?" And and what happened with the board is that they did not want to fire him for stealing this money because it was stolen on their watch, and there's a bunch of other owners. And so
Mhm.
they thought that the owners, they might be in legal risk from the other owners for letting it happen on their watch. And if nothing else, they would have a bunch of people who were pissed off that it happened while under their watch. The other thing is, this guy was in his 60s at this point. If he owed 700 plus $1,000 and they fired him, he wouldn't be able to get another job at his
Right.
age. Nothing that paid nearly what they paid him there, which was, he was paid very handsomely at this
Mhm.
job. But again, did I say this is not fraud? This was never prosecuted. This was never, he was eventually, he eventually, what happened is the board forced him to take out a mortgage. He didn't have any mortgage on his
Mhm.
cabin. So they're like, you have to go to a real bank, get a real loan on your cabin, and all the proceeds from that cabin has to come to us to pay it back. That took care of about 2/3 of the loan. Then he owned a little bit of property in one of the building. That took care of about another tenth of the loan. The
Mhm.
rest of it, they just had to write off.
However, the fact that they got back anything is better
Right.
than most people that are victim of fraud.
Right. And
Mhm.
again, doing all the math, they basically got back enough to cover the principal of the money that he had taken. But again, according to GAAP,
Sure.
there's no zero interest loans, so interest had been increased. So he basically got a free loan for
Mhm.
about 15 years. So yeah, it was nice that the company was, and it didn't tank the company after he was finally let go for reasons completely apart from this loan that was
Hmm.
not fraud.
Hmm.
Again, I have to state that it was not fraud. Please, if he happens to be
Right.
listening to this LinkedIn live, I am saying he did not commit
You're
fraud.
not naming names
Yeah,
anyway,
he
so.
he took he took money and part of it was paid and part of it was forgiven. That's
Mhm.
not fraud. But also, you know what I'm saying. So
Right, right.
so the company was made whole. We restructured. We saved tons of money after he left, and the company is thriving more than it ever had before. So
And sometimes opportunities come on the heel of something that seems like a disaster.
yeah,
But one of the things that I see is that, okay, there's a lot of people that are outsourced accountants, bookkeepers, CPAs, tax preparers, and some of them are the ones actually committing the fraud themselves
yeah,
because they're in a money business.
yep.
So how can a business owner who is outsourcing the bookkeeping and the tax work to somebody maybe become aware of something being a little fishy or
Right.
about preventing that from happening in the book in the first place?
First off, you got to open your mail. Well, again, to give a personal story,
Yeah.
when so I'm still working for that same company with the $605,000 not fraud that I was just talking about,
Mhm.
and it's a great company, but it's a very small company. We have exactly 3 employees. The only benefits that I've ever had at this company is just health insurance, and that's it. So my retirement's been on me. So I started make so when that was I knew that when I was negotiating my pay, so I made sure that I was getting enough so I could take some and start investing it myself. I went to Merrill Lynch and I was like, "Hey, I need to start a retirement account. Please help me." And I was just like going, "You guys are pros. I'm not. I want you just to take care of this." I would send the money in to whoever my advisor was, and they would invest it for me. And I did that for a bunch of years, and then finally I was like, "This doesn't seem like it's growing at the rate that it should." And I started doing an analysis of what should have happened according to the stock market versus what my returns were. And I was getting like barely 3 or 4% return, whereas the stock market over this period of time had because it was right because I got this job in 2009. So it was the
Mhm.
stock market was still tanked from the recession and it had been coming out and just booming. And I should have ridden that wave of like huge returns at that point, and I was getting 3 or 4%. And so I look at it and I go, okay, that's what happens. I send it into these guys and they're going, oh, what can I invest them in that's going to get me the best commission and not that's going to do. So at
Mhm.
that point I realized, okay, and did fraud happen there? Absolutely not. But the problem was I need to make sure as the guy who owns that retirement account, I got to make sure that it's doing what I want it to and what I'm expecting it to. As a business owner, you have to have at least that much interest in the finances of your own business. Even if you hate money, you hate math, you don't understand any of it, you've got to
Mhm.
get a bare minimum and you have to open your damn mail. That's the thing. Like with a lot of these people, it's like, I
Mhm.
didn't know because I just thought somebody was taking care of it. Look into it. You got to at least do some base. And then if things aren't adding up, ask all the questions and ask follow-up questions until you are satisfied. And if you're not satisfied, get a new pair of eyes to look at.
Okay, so you're making a really important point that I want to highlight because it's so simple, but it makes a difference. Is money needs to be paid attention to. And
Absolutely.
even if you have someone else doing your bookkeeping or something like that, if that person knows you're actually looking at your statements,
Yeah.
tracking things, they're less likely to actually help themselves than if they realize that nobody's going to miss it anyway.
Right, exactly. Well, it's I worked at a gas station back right after so when I first graduated from college, it was with a math degree. The only
Mhm.
job I could get was at a gas station. It's because math degrees. So I was working there and they had cameras up and I was working the graveyard shift. And I was like going, "Oh, you got cameras up. Is that because like people have been committing crimes at this gas station and now gonna work overnight at?" And they're like going, "No, those cameras are here to watch you." Is what what they said. And I go,
Mhm.
okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. And it's exactly what you said. If you know you're being watched,
Mhm.
you're not gonna mess around.
Yep.
And so again, especially small business owners, you're the one watching. You got to make sure that you have at least the financial literacy to be able to get a sense of whether or not things
Mhm.
are being done as they should.
Okay, then the other side of this question is that we know our bookkeepers, our accountants are on the front lines hoping to protect us. They're looking out for our best interests as business owners. So is there something that they can put in place that would actually help to prevent fraud for their business clients or their personal wealth clients?
Again, I think that the biggest thing is that as the out like if you're a hired bookkeeper or a hired
Yeah.
an outsourced CFO for a company, something like that, you are that person. I mean, I'm going to assume this outsourced bookkeeper or outsourced CFO is a good
Mhm.
guy, as a
Yeah.
good guy, which
Yes.
again, that was the person I was working at the firm when I got hired to do this engagement with the company with the $605,000 not fraud. Is she was great. She was incredibly ethical, but
Mhm.
she should have been ringing a bell and sounding an alarm a lot louder than she did. So as that person, you need to realize that part of your job is like defender of your clients. And if anything's looking weird, you need to set up an appointment with your client and sit them down and say, this might not be fraud. This might be 100% legit, but I want to talk you through it, make sure you understand what's happening. So you're looking for the red
Mhm.
flags because, again, they're not experts at that. You
Mhm.
try to look at all the red flags and anything that's fishy, bring it up. And because we want to see ourselves as that person, as CPAs or as accountants, as bookkeepers, as outsourced CFOs, that we are that person. But again, we're also under the constraints of we got all these, we got deadlines, we got more work to do. Do
Yes.
am I personally responsible for my client's financial well-being? You're not, but you're their main line of defense against that. So take that seriously. If you see anything that's fishy, and also that's going to endear you to them if you sit down and go, hey, this looks weird. I want to make sure it's not weird. Let's go through it till we figure it
Mhm.
out. It's okay. Okay, cool. I'll let you know the next time I see something fishy.
And I think that that adds value. So for anybody that's a accountant, a bookkeeper, a tax preparer, if you see something, just go ahead and let your clients know what you see so that you can do something hopefully preventatively as opposed to after the fact, which is going to be so much more costly for everybody involved.
Absolutely.
Because even though we want to not be defensive so we don't live our lives, I think there's something about risk mitigation and
Yeah.
prevention also when it comes to our money.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. My whole point of bringing that up wasn't, yeah, don't worry
Yeah.
about it.
I don't want to
You
live in a
might get,
bubble in a
yeah, you
bubble.
might get screwed. You might not get screwed. Who knows? It's the universe. Maybe karma,
Mhm.
maybe live a better. It wasn't that at all. It was that
Yeah.
even the smartest people can still get, it can
Yeah.
still get stung by this stuff. So you can never 100% mitigate fraud. But yeah,
Right.
there's some very common sense, very cost effective things that you can do to help lower the possibility of it happening to
Yeah.
you.
This is where
Absolutely.
triple redundancy is a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, and again, the whole make sure your learning is faster than
Mhm.
the rate that the fraudster.
Yes.
If you don't have multi-factor authentication for everything that you do online,
Mhm.
if you haven't activate that, especially on your bank account, then right there, that's something that I mean, it's going to cost you a few seconds every
Mhm.
time you log on to your bank account, but it's incredibly important and incredibly effective.
So you're bringing up something that I'm curious about then. With so much out there regarding AI, is there any particular AI tool that you would recommend?
Oh, AI tool I would recommend.
Yeah, that
I
would help with maybe detecting fraud or preventing fraud or anything regarding that.
I don't know of any AI tools that I'm aware of yet that are
Okay.
effective at, but I do know, keeping my ear to the ground enough in
Yeah.
the accounting profession, I know that there are people who are in the process of creating tools that are like that, which is
Hmm.
great. And I think AI has the potential of actually kind of I mean, you're never going to not have to have a human who's double checking your AI's work.
Of
But I
course.
do think AI is capable where you can feed them, because audits, they sample transactions to
Hmm.
to to analyze. AI, you got robots, and robots can analyze every single transaction that you have. That's the potential of AI. So once it's trained, it can do that. So I think there's a possibility that, especially given it if you're able to train the AI appropriately, it could ferret out a whole lot of fraud, at least financial statement fraud, I think could
Hmm.
happen. But does that exist yet? Not to my knowledge. What I'm more worried about
Uh,
AI is its potential in the hands of fraudsters to trick you
of course.
into giving your money to them, because now that you can feed them voice, like audio files, and the
Yes.
AI can mimic someone's voice. That's a huge problem. So then you
Yep.
get a phone call. So it's the whole idea of
The robocalls are now starting like sounding like real people.
exactly.
Yep.
Well, and there's the whole thing you've heard about, like wire transfer fraud, where someone's looking at
Yep.
your email, intercepting emails, and they know you're buying a house or something like that, and they know you're expecting the wire transfer information from your title company. They send it to you first. It's fraudulent, and you have to check with your title company, go call them up and go, hey, this is the information I just
Mhm.
received, is it accurate? But now, again, in theory, they could see
Right.
if you're just dialing the number that's, if they're playing you hard enough, you'll have a
Mhm.
number that goes back to them, where even if you've
Yes.
met the title company, they could mimic their voice. It's all a possibility. I don't know if it's happening yet, but there's lots of dangers out there with AI.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your podcast, what makes it unique, and what somebody might be finding or walking away with if they go ahead and check it out.
So, what makes our podcast unique is that it's a pod. Well, first off, I'm a stand-up comedian. I've been doing stand-up comedy for a
Mhm.
couple of decades now. The guy I do it with, he's the founder of Going Concern, which is like a snarky accounting website. Got a great sense of humor. What we do in terms I think we've put out a very entertaining podcast. But it's also, he's a former CPA. I'm still a currently licensed CPA. So the thing that makes this unique is it's a true crime podcast that focuses almost exclusively on white collar crime, except for the few times where we get a good murder or a good suicide, or something like that in there.
Mhm.
Gosh, I just said the words "good suicide." I just so yeah,
It's okay. You're
but
geeking out on your
you
podcast.
you
I
know what I
totally
mean.
get
A
it.
good
And it's
story.
called Oh My Fraud for anybody listening.
Yeah, and you can get continuing education credits for listening to it, which I
Oh,
think is,
that's pretty cool.
yeah. So through Earmark CPE,
Yep.
you can get continuing educations for doing it. So it's a great way to do it. But also, if you just like true crime, it's just a good listen. It's so fun how many listeners we get feedback from, who are like, I'm not an accountant. I don't know anything about accounting. I don't even know what CPE stands for. I just listen to it because it's a great podcast. So we're really proud of what we have, and it's very unique in the space too. So.
Very nice. So, Greg, always a wonderful conversation. I am looking forward to actually meeting you in person next in a couple weeks. Some of the things that we did cover is uncovering the overlooked weaknesses that will put clients at risk. Also, those advanced strategies you can put in place to protect your clients' financials against fraud, and those true crimes that are real life as far as what's happening out there. You can't make this stuff up. So if somebody wanted to connect with you as well as Oh My Fraud, what is the best way for them to do that?
The best way to connect with me would be just through LinkedIn. That's kind of the only social media outlet that I'm still even sort of engaging with. So a direct
Mhm.
message through LinkedIn would be great. I'm just Greg Kite CPA. My last name is Kyte instead of the normal way you spell it.
Yep.
So yeah, that's, and also, if you do direct message me through LinkedIn, be patient. I probably haven't been on LinkedIn in a month. There's probably a tons of, well, I think that's how we connected, was through
Yep.
LinkedIn. Yeah. So again, be patient. I'll
He
get there
does show up
eventually.
periodically.
Yeah. Every now and then I'll parachute in and do what I need to do, and then get the hell out of there,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I am also a firm believer that, other than LinkedIn's pretty good, but all the other ones not great for one's mental health, which I'm a pretty big advocate for mental health as well. So,
Mhm.
but anyways, yeah, that's a good way to get hold of me.
Anyway, thank you for the engaging conversation. And this is Warren Fogelman with Business Success Solution, showing accounting firm owners how to double their income working half the time.